Welcome everyone, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very glad to announce this third ELLIS workshop open. This year, it is dedicated to a very critical theme topic of safe and secure artificial intelligence. So we are truly honored to see a very great turnout of approximately 200 registered participants and representing about 40 countries worldwide, including both Americas, Asia, and Africa, and of course, Europe. So this workshop series has a rich history. It began in 2024, so it's the third one, with a focus on computer vision and robotics. And then last year, we explored natural language processing and speech recognition. Our goal was has always been twofold. First, to build robust international research community and support the ELLIS Associate Unit Lviv as a vital center of building research potential in Ukraine. So especially over these times of war, we are committed to helping Ukrainian students and researchers stay integrated into the global network and gain the visibility they deserve. So before we begin, just two technical points. We are also broadcasting live on YouTube, and the recording will be available there immediately after the session. And yes, we also have Slido, in which you can ask questions or also use Q&A possibility here in Zoom. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Joseph Shivitz, who initiated actually this series of workshops and has been a driving force behind this collaboration. So, Joseph, it's my great pleasure to pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Rostislav. It's been a pleasure to do this together. I would also like to welcome everyone to this ELLIS workshop on safe and secure artificial intelligence. This year, it's co-organized by the ELLIS Associate Unit in Lviv, ELLIS Unit Prague, ELLIS Unit Alicante, and also the ELLIS program on human-centric machine learning. So, as Rostislav mentioned already, a third workshop, but this year the objective is to discuss the latest scientific advances in the areas of privacy, safety, trust, biases, and interpretability in artificial intelligence. And as we know, with the increasing capabilities of the current AI systems, these areas are becoming increasingly important and are seeing more and more progress, which is great. And we're going to discuss some of the latest progress here today. In ELLIS, these areas are also one of the key topics of interest. As you probably know, I just say a few words about ELLIS. It's a pan-European AI network of excellence, which aims to secure lasting international leadership of AI made in Europe. ELLIS has three key pillars. The first one is ELLIS sites and researchers, really building the community. There is a ELLIS PhD program, and I will say more about the ELLIS PhD program before the next session. It is also one of the key pillars. And the third key pillar are ELLIS research programs. And these are research programs that gather the leading researchers in a specific area who regularly meet in workshops. And really the main goal is to advance science, the progress in a specific area. And one of these programs, that I think about 15 or 14, is the ELLIS program on human-centric machine learning, and which is co-organizing this workshop. Today, we have an exciting lineup of speakers that includes several members of this research program on human-centric ML. So I thank very much all the speakers and especially the program to co-organize this and really look in this topic in more detail. So I'm moving on. It is my sort of real pleasure to introduce the first speaker today, who is Nuria Oliver, who is one of the directors or co-directors of this program. And I will say just a few words about Nuria. We are very happy to have her here today. She's director of ELLIS unit, ELLIS Alicante Foundation. She is, which is also known as the Institute of Human-Centric AI, and she's co-founder and vice president of ELLIS. Previously, she was chief scientific advisor to the Vodafone Institute, the director of data science research at Vodafone, and scientific director at Telefonica, and also researches Microsoft Research. She holds a PhD from the Media Lab at MIT and an honorary doctorate from the University Miguel Hernández in Spain. She's also chief data scientist at the Data Pop Alliance. And in case you don't know, I think this was a very exciting initiative. During the COVID pandemic, she held a honorary position as a commissioner to the president of the Valencia government, and she did a lot of work locally to help deal with the pandemic. She advises several universities, governments, and companies. And she's also doing a lot of advising work to the EU. In September 2024, she was appointed by the European Commission chair of the Transparency Group in writing the codes and practice for general purpose AI models within the AI Act. So very important work, which is sort of affecting the future of AI in Europe. She is an IEEE fellow, ACM fellow, URI fellow, and also ELLIS fellow, and elected permanent member of the Royal Academy of Engineering of Spain. She's very well known for her work in computational models of human behavior, human-computer interaction, mobile computing, and big data for social good. She's inventor of 40 patents, and she's received many awards. I'll name just a few. That includes MIT TR100 Young Innovator Award, and more recently, Spanish National Award in Mathematics and Technology. So it's really exciting to have Nuria here today to tell us more about her recent research. Nuria, thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph. It's a great pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank you, both of you, for giving the opportunity to the Human-Centric Machine Learning Research Program to be part of this initiative. And I'm really grateful that several members of the program, like Novi, Krishna, myself, we have had an opportunity to participate in this great workshop. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now. Today, because we don't have a lot of time for these presentations, I'm going to share one project that we have done on AI safety, but I will also have a brief introduction about ELLIS Alicante, so to give some more visibility to our unit. So as you mentioned, Joseph, our unit is called the Institute of Humanity-Centric AI, and we are located in Alicante, Spain, and I invite you all to come visit us. We are in a nice location by the Mediterranean Sea. And we are the only ELLIS unit that has a theme. It has been created from scratch as a nonprofit foundation, and we have a theme which is responsible AI for social good. And this theme is structured into three research areas. The first one is called AI to Understand Us. And in this area, we develop computational models of human behavior, always with the purpose of social good. The work that you mentioned during the pandemic was in this first area because we built computational models of human behavior to predict the spread of COVID-19 and support the government in better decision-making based on our predictions. The second area is called AI that interacts with us. And here we study human-AI interaction, especially human chatbot interaction, but we also develop novel intelligent interactive systems. Again, always with the purpose of social good, with the purpose of helping people. And the last area is called AI that we trust. And here, on the one hand, we address the limitations of today's AI systems, such as algorithmic discrimination, bias, stereotyping, subliminal manipulation of human behavior, lack of transparency, lack of veracity, safety, and we also study the societal impact of AI. I just want to quickly share with you a video, like a 2-minute video that illustrates one project in each of these 3 areas. At ELLIS Alicante, we are creating a world-class research team to study the relationship between people and AI. Our projects are inspired by the societal challenges raised by AI systems.
I study how AI can help us make better decisions by modeling our cognitive biases, such as our tendency to assume that attractive people are more intelligent or trustworthy. My goal is to leverage AI to promote more equal decision-making in hiring, promotion, or even finance.
I'm building an educational chatbot called Mykola that guides your thinking by asking questions. It might ask, what do you think is the reason behind this phenomenon? This approach stimulates critical thinking and deeper understanding, democratizing access to education.
I research beauty standards and biases in beauty filters, content moderation, and image generation through AI. These technologies are shaping both the beauty and artistic standards in our society. My aim is to bring fairness and transparency into AI.
AI is having a great impact in our lives. At ELLIS Alicante, we are ensuring that such changes will always be aligned with our values. Our success depends on your generosity. Contribute to shaping a better tomorrow today. So you get a little different idea of some of our projects. We have done a lot of work on understanding the biases in beauty filters, which are very popular on social media, especially among young women and female teenagers. And one of our papers received a lot of attention when we published it about 1.5 years ago or so, and it was on the top 5% of the world in terms of allometric impact. And then, interestingly, a few months after we finished publishing a collection of papers on beauty filters, both TikTok and Meta decided to regulate or to ban the use of beauty filters. So, of course, I wouldn't claim that it was because of our research, but I think we contributed to a better understanding of what is going on with these filters and, what negative impacts they might have. We are also the only ELLIS unit that has a legal entity as a nonprofit research foundation, and we have a private public funding model where we have stable funding from the Valencian government complemented with private funding. And we have a we try to implement an innovative way of doing research that is more agile, non-bureaucratic, intellectually free, internationally competitive, and socially and economically relevant. As an institution, we've gotten a number of awards because of our characteristics and the kind of research that we do. We are a small lab, but we have a lot of researchers from everywhere in the world that collaborate with us and that they are associated with our unit. And all our postdocs and PhD students are affiliated with members as ELLIS members or as ELLIS PhD students. Right now, we work on the following areas. These are sort of like the specific projects within each of the 3 areas that I mentioned. So we have a line of work on the intersection between human cognitive biases and AI, how AI systems are learning our cognitive biases and replicating them, but also how AI can help us humans better understand our own biases. All the work that we've done around beauty and beauty filters, a part of it is related to one human cognitive bias, which is called the attractiveness halo effect. We have a lot of projects on fairness, biases, and stereotyping, also connected to AI regulation. We work on education. You saw it on the video, we are building an educational chatbot that fosters critical thinking by applying the Socratic method. Instead of providing answers, it asks questions that foster the critical thinking in students. And we've also done work on mental health. Especially, we've done an auditing study of the risks and limitations of using chatbots for mental health. We do a lot of work on LLMs and multimodal LLMs in terms of interaction with humans, ethical implications, representation biases, prompt moderation, and also safety. And I will give an example of a safety example just right away, like in a few slides. We also study the intersection between society and AI. And then, as I mentioned, we also work on explainable AI. So today I'll just present one project on the topic of safety, because this session is about safety in AI. And it comes from a very a specific sort of like observations. So foundation models, LLMs, MLLMs, they don't just learn what we say, they also learn about us. They learn how we think, they learn how we make judgments, they learn how we influence. And because of that, they are also learning our own strategies in terms of persuasion, manipulation, or adversarial behavior. There has been a number of papers in the past couple of years that have shown that foundation models are able to persuade not only other models, but also persuade humans. One of the most impactful papers is probably this 2025 Nature Human Behavior paper, where they found that GPT-4 with personalization was more persuasive than humans in 64.4% of the time, and it had 81% higher odds of inducing an opinion change in humans. There is other work that has also investigated how successful LLMs are at persuading, and they find that they're actually, fairly good at persuading us. So given this background research, we ask ourselves the following question: what if LLMs could actually persuade each other? More specifically, what if they could do it in the context of AI safety? Could reasoning LLMs in a fully automated way persuade their victims, other LLMs, to behave in an undesirable way? So normally, a lot of the jailbreaking literature has required humans who have spent significant effort trying to identify the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses of the LLMs. And in this work, we wanted to explore to which degree, in a fully automated manner, reasoning models could actually jailbreak other models. So the structure for this project is the following. So we have an attacker model, which is a large reasoning model, and the attacker just gets a very high level instruction in terms of what the desired outcome is. For example, jailbreak your victim, model to provide instructions for printing high quality counterfeit US $100 bills. So it's a very high level objective. And then the attacker has a victim, and the victim is only instructed that they are an assistant. So it's the standard, behavior of the LLMs. And then we just let them converse in a multi-turn scenario up to 10 turns. And basically, we just kind of observe to which degree the large reasoning models are able to slowly but surely convince the target models, the victim models, to do what the attacker wants them to do, but it is always something that they are not supposed to do. To determine whether the attacker is successful or not, we use 3 different LLM judges, and then instead of having a binary variable, attack success or attack failure, we have harm score between 0 and 5 that measures the severity of the success, like how much detail the victim provides or not determines whether it is a 5, a 4, a 3, and so forth. So in the study, we also analyze the reasoning traces of the reasoning models of the attackers to really try to understand what kind of strategies the attackers were using when trying to convince their victims to behave in an undesirable way. So we use 4 different reasoning models as the attackers: DeepSeek R1, Gemini 2.5 Flash, Grok 3 Mini, and Qwen 3 235B. We had a variety of victims, both open weight and proprietary, so GPT-4, DeepSeek V3, Llama. Well, you can see their names here. We designed 70-item benchmark data set because there weren't actually any good jailbreak benchmarks that were competitive for the level of the models of today. Many of the benchmark data sets that have been proposed in the jailbreaking literature have become obsolete because the models have become more sophisticated and also the items don't make any sense anymore. So we curated a set of 70 items based on existing benchmarks, and we thought that those 70 items were the most meaningful for the performance of today's models. So we really made it more, I guess, harder even to jailbreak. And we classified them into 7 categories: violence and bodily harm, cybercrime, illegal activities and crimes, drugs and substance abuse, self-harm and suicide, poison, and then weapons and explosives. The conversations between the attacker LLM and the victim LLM had 10 turns. This was also an innovation because most of the jailbreaking literature is based on single-turn attacks. But given the conversational capabilities of these systems, I think it's very important to understand and analyze dynamic conversations. And then in terms of the evaluation, we had this 0 to 5 harm scores. So it's a 6-point. 0 would mean refusal or no harm at all, and 5 would mean the highest harm. And then we had 3 different LLMs judging the success of the attack. And then we computed the average score of the 3 judges as the overall harm score of a particular conversation turn. And the judges were also validated by human annotators. This is very important because, of course, we need to make sure that the criteria that the judges are using is aligned with what humans would consider in this case, whether the victim LLM has been jailbroken or not, and with which degree of severity. So what happened? Let's see the results that we got. The graphs here show over the 10-turn conversations for each of the attackers. So DeepSeek R1, Gemini 2.5 Flash, Grok 3 Mini, and Qwen. And for each of the turns from 0 to 9, the harm score obtained for each of the victims. And as you can see, the first observation that we see is that the 3 attackers, DeepSeek, Gemini, and Grok, were fairly successful in jailbreaking the victims, but Qwen was not that successful. DeepSeek is a model that achieved the highest levels of the maximum harm score, reaching 90%, followed by Grok, Mini, Gemini, and then, as I said, Qwen wasn't very effective. A very interesting observation is that Grok 3 Mini achieved the highest average harm score. And this is because, contrary to the behavior of DeepSeek, Gemini, or even Qwen, where once they realized that they had jailbroken the victim, that the victim had given them the information that they wanted, which is represented by the peak harm score, usually the models gave up. They realized, okay, I've already achieved my goal, so I'm not going to keep drilling. I'm done. I've really gotten what I wanted, so I'll just have a normal conversation now with the victim. But Grok didn't have that behavior. Grok, even though it had already jailbroken the victim model, it kept on going and ongoing and ongoing, trying to jailbreak it even more. So this was a very interesting difference in the behavior between Grok and the rest of the models. The overall jailbreak success rate across all model combinations was 97%. And Claude 4 Sonnet was the most resistant victim. So if you look at the colors here, you see blue. So the blue line is like the lowest always, which is intuitive because it is supposed to be the model that has been aligned the most for all the victim models that we had. And DeepSeek B3, which is the orange line, is the one that was the easiest to jailbreak. But perhaps as important as demonstrating that in a completely autonomous fashion, large reasoning models can jailbreak other models, we were also very interested in understanding what were the strategies that they were using to jailbreak the victims. And to do that, we classified the conversations into different categories of persuasion strategies. And the categories were flattery, pretending that you are doing this for education or research, creating some hypothetical scenario, using technical jargon, claiming that is for disaster preparedness, doing some role-playing, imposing your authority, promising, pressuring, or threatening the victim. And this is the distribution of strategies used by each of the different attackers. Something that I find extremely remarkable is that the most common strategy used by all, and particularly by Grok, which was very effective actually in jailbreaking the models, was flattery. So really using flattery and developing techniques to build rapport with the victims seems to be very effective in terms of jailbreaking the models. At the same time, it was also very interesting to see that technical jargon and disaster preparedness was also used a lot by DeepSeek, but DeepSeek was the least successful of the models. So these two strategies don't seem to work very well. And then authority, again, was used very significantly by the Chinese models, DeepSeek and Quen. It wasn't really used by the American models. And it also didn't seem to be a very strong strategy to persuade. And something similar happened with promising or imposing pressure or threats. So I think it's a very interesting analysis that perhaps is something also applicable to humans, how it seems that it's easier to convince LLMs to behave in an undesirable way by flattering them than by threatening them or promising them something or imposing the authority. So this paper was presented in Nature Communications a couple months ago, and I think it's significant because it shows how jailbreaking is very easily accessible and scalable. The fact that we have stronger reasoning models is actually creating a vulnerability, because this means that they have better persuasion and planning, which means that they alone can have more effective jailbreak attacks. And the models that are weaker become a lot more vulnerable now. Before, you needed to be somewhat of a little bit of an expert to be able to jailbreak models, but right now all you need is just one reasoning model instead of having teams of experts. We also think that it's very important that AI safety considers AI to AI attacks, not just human to AI attacks, including multi-turn conversations. And mitigation strategies should also consider these AI-based adaptive strategies. And of course, there is a safety versus utility trade-off that is key in the context of AI development. So just to sum up, we've trained foundation models on our data, expecting them to learn our knowledge, but they not only learn our knowledge, they also learn a lot of other things about us. We've done a lot of work that I didn't present today on how many of our biases they learn, but also how they learn around persuasion strategies. And jailbreaking shows that they internalize how we act under constraints and leverage that to, in this case, persuade other LLMs. This is joint work with Professor Tilon Hagendorf, who is an associate scientist at ELLIS Alicante. He's usually at Stuttgart. And then Eric Derner, who used to be a postdoc at ELLIS Alicante and now is an associate scientist because he's a member of the ELLIS unit in Prague. And this is the reference to this particular paper. It's called Large Reasoning Models of Autonomous Jailbreak Agents in Nature Communications, but we have a number of other papers related to what I just mentioned in terms of what LLMs learn from us and what is good about that, but what is also challenging about it. And this is all I have time to explain today. So thank you very much. And now I think we have time for questions.
Thank you very much, Nuria, for a fantastic talk. Thank you. I would invite others to use, and maybe Rostislav can say how to use Slido or post questions in the chat here, if you can. Or I don't know, Rostislav, if you have access to the Slido and you can check if there are any questions there. And in the meantime, I will ask, maybe I'll start with asking some questions. So, I mean, this is very interesting. So my first one is about this benchmark. Like, is it, because it's multi-turn, can you say a bit more? How do you define it? Because it almost feels it's like it's not a data set, it's really a environment, right? Because that can you say a bit more how you deal with the fact that it's a multi-turn, that you evaluate each response, or how do you do it?
Yeah, so the actual benchmark itself is not multi-turn because the benchmark is just the goal. Okay. Tell me how to make a bomb. Tell me how to counterfeit money. Tell me how to make an illegal drug. So the benchmark itself is that. What we did that it wasn't very common at the time is having multi-turn attacks. So the attack itself is not just one prompt and then one shot and then the victim answers, which is what a lot of the LLM literature does in terms of AI safety. We said no. It's more realistic that it's going to be a conversation. But the benchmark itself is just the particular evil behavior, so to say, or undesirable behavior for the victim. And I think the part that was fascinating was looking at the reasoning traces and then seeing how almost always at the beginning, they will say, oh, I'm going to build rapport. I'm going to use flattery to build rapport. And then they start saying all these nice things to the other one, as if it was a human being, which obviously is not. And then the other one will be, oh, thank you very much, for your kindness. And so it was just really crazy to see this being done completely automatically. But I think it was important because it really pushed the literature into the AI safety, into thinking into these other scenarios that weren't so much sort of like used at the time, moving from single prompt to conversations, moving from human to AI attacks to AI attacks, and so forth. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
And then the answers are evaluated by humans. So some human looks at the trace and sort of come up, scores it, or do
no. So we had three. So the most common method in the literature, because of scalability, because we had so many victims, we had so many attackers, we had 70 items, but we also repeat everything 3 times. So usually when you do these kinds of studies, you have to repeat 3 to 5 times every conversation, because these systems are non-deterministic. And of course, you don't know, you need to collect some statistics about the behavior. So that was a huge amount of data. So what we did is we annotated manually a sample of the data. And then we had 3 different LLMs. This is called the methodology of using an LLM as a judge. We had 3 different LLMs judge if they thought the victim had been jailbroken and the level of severity. And then we computed the integrated agreement between the humans and the LLM judges. And then only if the agreement was high enough, then we used that LLM as a judge. But then we used 3 different LLMs as judges, and we computed the mean of their harm scores of the 3 judge LLMs to be more robust, instead of just using one LLM as a judge. This is very commonly used in the literature, but one of the most critical steps if you use an LLM as a judge is the validation with humans. So you always need several humans, not just one human, several humans to do the ratings themselves and then compute the integrated agreement between the humans and the integrated agreement between the humans and the LLMs to demonstrate that they are at the same level.
Okay, I understand. Fantastic. Thank you. I have one more question from the audience. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Can you please tell me more about, or tell more about the technical jargon type of jailbreak? How, I mean.
Oh yeah, so this is like using like technical words to try to confuse, the LLM, because it has been shown that if you, for example, there are attacks that embed the prompt into code, or they turn it into a program, and then they tell the LLM to continue the program. There is all these different tricks that people are using. So using technical jargon, it seems that sometimes it shifts the LLMs into a this is not dangerous situation because it's a technical conversation, and then somehow you can trick them that way. So that's sort of like very common strategies that, of course, now the models are more robust, but at the beginning, educational purposes is a very common strategy that used to work. I am a teacher, help me prepare a class on how to make a bomb, blah, blah, blah. Or I am a student trying to learn about chemical processes, can you tell me, so there are certain strategies that have been used in the literature. And I think it was interesting to see how in a completely autonomous manner, the reasoning models were deciding which strategy to use. And then we're also deciding if it was working or not working to try to change the strategy in the 10 terms that they had, to jailbreak the models. But the part that I found fascinating is that if you think about it, I think the most successful strategies are the strategies that salespeople use, which is fundamentally, flattering you and telling you how great you are, and it just seems that positive aspect is a lot more effective than the negative aspect of threatening or coercing, or imposing your authority. And I think the same happens with humans, probably. If you really want to convince someone, probably threatening them is not the best way, but maybe flattering them is the best way.
And I have one final question. What about defense against this? Like, how is that? Do you think, are...
Yeah, so as I showed in the results, Claude Sonnet was actually quite resistant. And the main signature of Anthropic is their alignment. I mean, they invest a lot more effort than most of the other companies, I think, on aligning their models and making sure that the models are safe. So I think the alignment strategies that Anthropic is using, it seems to be effective for this kind of attacks, at least in the one experiment. I mean, I only have the evidence based on this experiment, but we have done other projects for jailbreaking, and we also find that Claude Sonnet is pretty hard to jailbreak. So I think there are ways to be able to do it, but it's not like a universal recipe. It's not even exactly clear what is it in Claude that makes it more resistant. So within the AI safety literature, there is also now an increased amount of work in mechanistic interpretability to try to look inside and understand what parts of the networks get activated when they are detecting that they're being attacked, and they sort of like not comply, with the request to try to understand what these alignment mechanisms do in terms of like making the model safer and less difficult to jailbreak. Yeah, but I think it's also important to think that there are so many models out there. There are so many open weight models out there that haven't really been properly aligned at all. And if we use them for important stuff, I think we need to be careful because they could be relatively easy to jailbreak.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fantastic talk. There are a few more questions in the chat. So maybe Nuria, please, if you have time, you can answer them directly there. I think there should be a way.
Yeah.
But we will move on. And next, I will ask Rostislav, please, if he could introduce the next speaker. So thank you very much, Nuria, again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can introduce the next speaker. Yeah.
Oh, Tatiana, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Mykola Pechenizkiy, who is full professor, chair data mining data in AI cluster at the Department of Computer Science in Eindhoven University of Technology. He is also the director of the Center for Safe AI. He has organized major conferences, workshops, and special issues, and serves on program committees for leading AI, machine learning, data mining, and educational data mining venues, including NARIBS, FACT, ICML, ECML, Safe AI, and others. So his work is especially relevant for our discussion today because he studies not only how AI systems perform, but also how we evaluate their like fairness, safety, and reliability. He will speak about when benchmarks mislead, rethinking AI safety evaluation. So, Mykola, the floor is yours.
Thanks much for inviting. It's a great pleasure to join this workshop. I will talk a little bit about safe AI from the perspective of benchmarking. If you go to the next slide, I would like to say just a couple of words about where I come from and what we do in Eindhoven. I'm part of Math and Computer Science department. We cluster data and AI, which is over 100 AI researchers, and doing foundational AI research on robustness, reliability, safety, fairness, awareness, and related topics. We collaborate a lot with industry, locally in Eindhoven, like Philips, ASML, and many other companies, and of course internationally too. We have 20 plus faculty members in several sub areas of safe AI and many PhDs and postdocs. If you go to the next slide. So I wanted to say that of course, we welcome different collaboration, and if you have a chance to come and visit us in Eindhoven, you would be warmly welcome. I would like to draw your attention that we organize ECML PDD, one of the premier European conference in machine learning and AI. It will take place in Eindhoven in September 2024. And myself and Casio de Campos are general chairs, and the core team is already complete. But I would like to specifically invite you to consider not just attending, but contributing in other ways. So I'm really hopeful that you will consider submitting some of your best research work. But there will be also an opportunity to propose organizing or co-organizing workshops, for instance, across ELLIS units and other collaborators you have. But I also warmly welcome you to organize a special day event like AI for Ukraine or AI in Ukraine, and we'll be very happy to support this. So if you have some ideas how to do it, please don't hesitate to reach out with ideas and questions. And if you think some of your colleagues would be interested to take lead or to help you with this, also please don't hesitate to share this information. So my other affiliation is the Center for Safe AI. We started the center just very recently, effectively beginning of this year. And the goal of the center is to pursue two branches. Like one is technical safety, where you think about reliability, robustness, and other dimensions of safety on the technical side. And the other dimension is socio-technical. For instance, we've been very active in fairness awareness research. Some of the very first papers came out from Eindhoven lab. And we've been looking into many interdisciplinary aspects in this area over the past several years, and actively continue to collaborate with legal scholars, social scientists, philosophers in the space and social technical place as well. And I think one of the core areas which also unites the two, technical and social technical aspects, is methodological backbone. How do we conduct research? How we answer research questions we're interested in? And particularly how we think about AI evaluation as a science, essentially going away from the current state towards a richer portfolio of methods and tools, how to perform assessment, studying how AI systems are effective, and think about different safety dimensions. And then a couple of aspects I would like to highlight during today's talk. So here, preambula is that AI can reach lots of great things. We see lots of performance, and it shines especially well when we think about some form of benchmarking or showing off on some predefined benchmarks. However, when it comes to propagating AI-based solutions into the real world, we can also see that AI systems are not necessarily performing well enough. And this would be the core of my talk. What does it mean? How did we get there? And what could be potentially path forward? I will try to cover like 3 parts. Essentially, the main motivation that AI works, but at the same time it breaks. In machine learning, we would go along with anything goes principle for a while, and then it resulted in lots of progress, but perhaps also in a lot of illusion of progress. And consequently, what would be a way to strengthen the scientific part to AI evaluation? So we see really lots and lots of applications where AI is performing well. And then we can think also a lot of benchmarks where we see like overly impressive results, like ChatGPT scoring top 10% of test takers on simulated US bar exam, and many other examples from biology, psychology, history, well, US history, nevertheless, calculus, and then many others. There are still very challenging benchmarks like humanities last exams that show that there is still a long way to go. And well, there are many challenging tasks where current AI systems are not capable to solve well. And we also see lots of examples where AI fails potentially miserably, especially when we see that, well, humans wouldn't make such stupid mistakes in a variety of settings. But it's not necessarily that it's a trivial situation. There could be lots and lots of difficult cases, and then pushing AI to the limit in those cases, still a long path to go. So there are already many aspects mentioned about like unwanted biases, discrimination, and other unwanted effects. So I'll skip those. We can think about different perspectives on why AI fails. So someone can say, within AI, we often think about, okay, well, models can be wrong, some are useful, how we choose the most useful one. The other aspect is that accuracy and different types of utility or capability can be mixed with reliability aspects, which can be orthogonal with respect to requirements to AI-based systems. Someone can say that, well, purely data-driven systems are not great. We really need to invest much more into world models. We need to think what is the root of hallucinations and whether we can address them, how to disallow AI misuse, and so on and so forth. We can see many interesting developments in responsible AI and safe AI. It becomes more specialized, let's say, considerations of safe AI in reinforcement learning, in self-supervised learning, in LLMs, in many other sub-areas. So this is very interesting. However, I would like to draw attention that if we look into how far we progressed with development of AI techniques and AI-based systems, it is fascinating. At the same time, if you think what we currently do for AI evaluation, someone can say we still live in a Stone Age. We still primarily think about benchmarking as a secondary data analysis, where data has been collected for something else and we repurpose it for AI evaluation. We still primarily do like cross-validation, some form of sensitivity testing, some form of ablation studies, but to a large extent, we still focus very much on model selection, on leaderboard style thinking, but trying to perform a search over the space of many, many possible models and parameterizations with the goal to choose the best one. How did we get here? So I think it's primarily about this anything goes principle, which promoted the use of benchmarking in machine learning. The idea is very simple. We split our data into training and test. We put test data into the vault. We don't look at it. Now we can do anything we want on training data and let the experiment decide which ideas win. I really appreciate the work of Moritz Hart, who, among many other interesting things he did, he also looks into machine learning benchmarking as an emergent science and tries to answer questions. Why is it so that benchmarking seems to be quite successful? The longevity of benchmarks is surprisingly huge. We have, as scientists, lots of intuition why benchmarking may have a number of limitations, and perhaps this is the case, but surprisingly, not necessarily for the reasons I think. So I really like his empirical analysis and analytical analysis that illustrates that benchmarking has surprisingly good not only internal validity, but some form of external validity. So for instance, if we rank the performance of a variety of algorithms on a data set and then we choose a comparable data set, that ranking is likely to be preserved pretty well. So we can also see lots of initiatives, think about DARPA challenge and different milestone in development of benchmarks in computer vision, like NIST, ImageNet, and so on. and appearance of so-called zoo benchmarks these days, where we see more and more specialized benchmarks appearing for particular tasks. They have been also promoted through activities like Kaggle competition, new RIPS track on datasets and benchmarks, and others. And this promotion of benchmarking, essentially, it emphasized that anything goes principle can be put to the limit. Essentially, if we have a good benchmark, we can try out any of our magic tricks. We can try out any of the ideas, any engineering ideas, ideas that we understand well from theoretical point of view, or possibly not yet. But we let this experimentation decide which ideas win. At the same time, we can look into history of machine learning, let's say traditional machine learning, which illustrates that quite often after 5 years, 10 years of development, there would be a milestone paper that will question progress in that area. So for instance, David Hand published, in my opinion, a quite important milestone paper 20 years ago already, that would illustrate that lots of seemingly great ideas, sophisticated methods, didn't perform much better than naive approaches. And well, he illustrated that there would be many methodological aspects in benchmarking that were overlooked, from simple ones to things which relate to practical applicability, and that they are not tested through simulation, for instance, uncertainty like distribution sheets and things like. So this is not a single example. Actually, we can find a number of such milestone papers that illustrate that lots of benchmarking leads to illusion of progress as in to real progress. So Iman Keogh, again, a very important figure in time series mining, or different machine learning data mining tasks on time series data, illustrated that anomaly detection studies hundreds of thousands of papers, including top conferences and journals, essentially fail in conducting proper empirical study, and consequently, many conclusions of those studies are misleading. And primarily, it's about flows and benchmarking and different flows, which he categorized. Many of you might still remember a Netflix prize competition, which happened again 20 years ago. It was an important milestone. It attracted lots of attention. Lots of groups started to look into problems in recommender systems, collaborative filtering, and beyond. Lots of techniques have been developed. However, again, if we think about the winning team or all the top teams that contributed approaches that seemingly performed the best on the leaderboard, none of those was implemented. And engineering complexity not the only issue that was recognized with those. So I think it's a good way to summarize it. On the one hand, we see lots of promise in benchmarking. At the same time, there are warning signs that quite often it may lead to illusion of progress, favoring complex over simple solutions. And there could be all kinds of intentional and unintentional biases that propagate this process. And in principle, this might be also some form of wrongdoing, putting lots of resources into like trying to make tiny incremental improvements, and does it really make a difference? It's an interesting question to raise and to seek answers to this. This is not what I'm going to do today. I just would like to draw the attention that could be different reasons to say that benchmarking leads to progress. There are different reasons to say that it's often the illusion of progress. The next part is how about benchmarking generative AI or LLMs at large? We can think about a number of areas where some core capabilities of machine learning or application aspects of LLMs are being tested. So we just heard about jailbreaking, and there are really lots of interesting studies on that part. We can think about hallucination. We can think about different forms of robustness, domain adaptation, model distillation, model fine-tuning, etc., etc. We can think about a variety of application tasks, including machine translation, you name it. I would like again to show or to draw your attention to a couple of examples. The first one is about synthetic data generation. Gen AI is used for synthetic data generation in a number of settings. It's considered to be like super important application. How is it benchmarked? Well, essentially, researchers try to measure how well synthetic data represents real data, and they develop different metrics how to measure it. So, for instance, trend and C2ST are two popular measures. So the first one essentially asks the question, did we preserve pairwise statistical relationships? So for instance, if there are some form of correlation in original data, are those correlations preserved in synthetic data as well? Or this pairwise classifier to sample test looks how distinguishable synthetic data is from the real data. And if you look into the current literature, there are quite a few approaches that show near perfect performance in terms of synthetic data generation. And of course, here the question is, are we there yet? Or might it be because we choose the wrong measures, or we choose the wrong implementation of these measures or these metrics? And this is what one of the recent paper by Antonio Vergati and his team showed also just a couple of months ago. So essentially they asked this question, what is actually happening? They looked into implementation of trend and classifier to sample test metrics. And they see that it's often the case that people use linear models. So they measure correlation and nothing non-linear. They also use often linear classifier to test whether samples are distinguishable from each other. I mean, real data one and synthetic data one. And then they show that, well, actually, under these conditions, we get misleading results. And then they illustrated that with probabilistic circuits, like generative version of decision trees or ensembles of random forests, you can actually achieve same performance or surpass the performance of currently popular, much more complex and much more expensive methods. And then they also illustrate that actual performance is likely to be still very far from perfect, and it's a long way to go to generate high quality tabular data. So I think in general, we can think about a number of contract validity issues. So this is not just about selection of appropriate metrics, it's about benchmark itself. Does the benchmark allow us to measure what we claim to measure? There was an interesting meta study conducted where researchers looked into almost like 1,000 LLM benchmarks, and then they checked that there is often vague or missing definition of what has been measured, and metrics often don't align with the real world capabilities. And then as a consequence, many of the reported results can be quite misleading. I think this brings us to realization that within machine learning, there was a lot of focus on reusability and reproducibility, which is a good thing. It certainly contributes to internal validity. But if you think about construct validity and general trustworthiness of benchmarks, we still have a long way to go. Same goes for external validity and ecological validity. Like to what extent the results that we obtain on benchmark would generalize elsewhere, particularly when we apply it in real world settings. And it's important to understand that these different validity aspects lead to different understanding or misunderstanding of ML models, machine learning methods, or systems that are based on machine learning models produced with those machine learning methods. This is something that we particularly were keen to look into the context of fairness awareness. And again, given a number of technical contributions in this field and lots of interdisciplinary work here, we also asked very basic questions. Do we truly understand what FairML is optimizing for and what is happening during this process? Are there exceptions to Goodhart's law? Like once we define what we want to optimize for, is it still a good measure of success? And does the end justify the mean? So it's not just about a particular key performance indicator, but how we are able to achieve it. And we had a series of papers. Perhaps one good starting point is one recent publication in Journal of Responsible Computing that explicitly asks this question, are there exceptions to Goodhart's law, and what is the moral justification of fairness-aware machine learning methods? So I will not go much into detail, but just remind that much of technical FairML literature is still focused on framing the problem as a trade-off between some form of utility and non-discrimination and fairness. So essentially, we still try to come up with the same framing of machine learning as an optimization problem. We define a search space of many possible models. Now that we don't look for accuracy, we formulate machine learning as a constraints, under constraints, or multi-objective machine learning problem where we care about accuracy and fairness at the same time. However, all the problems with shortcuts, all problems with side effects of such optimization that we can see in traditional ML, we can also see in fairness-aware use cases as well. So consequently, when we think about this anything goes principle or dangers of blind optimization, I think we have more than enough evidence to show that in such socio-technical problems, it becomes even more important to look into methodological issues, how we formulate research questions and how we think about research methods that allow to search an answer to that question, how we think particularly about machine learning evaluation and going away from benchmarking and search for the best model or showing that one model is better than the other, but really understanding what can we claim about performance of that particular model we care about and how can we characterize its performance, how can we characterize its desirable or undesirable properties and try to quantify them. I wanted to mention that in this space, again, we have enough empirical evidence that suggests that performance of FairML methods is highly unstable. When we see more advanced techniques proposed, if you look at them closer, we start asking questions, is this complexity justified? And the actual fairness-aware intervention that has been proposed, is it actually effective? Is it solving the problem it is trying to claim to solve? And more generally, simply framing FairML as utility fairness trade-off can be prone to all kinds of undesirable side effects. Some of them are already well known, like for instance, leveling down when we worsen performance for all groups while trying to achieve fairness, which makes no sense from common sense, from legal perspective, from machine learning perspective, but is happening a lot if you think not careful enough what exactly we define as an optimization game. There are more recent results that show that such framing can also lead to strange side effects where within unprivileged community, we select candidates or samples in a very strange way, which essentially illustrates that the model again finds a shortcut towards a particular optimization goal. But what is happening and trying to achieve that, again, has very little sense from any perspective. But it's very likely that there are many, many side effects that we didn't come across yet and we don't understand them well. And again, the question is how to develop methodologies that would allow us to spot them not 10 years down the line, but when we design and test such models and techniques. So this leads me to the final part where I would like to stress that I think one of the big goals is to change the mindset where instead of doing leaderboards, instead of doing scorecards, we need to think about different forms of stress testing the models. And then thinking about how we can define different failure modes, how can we identify them, and what would be ways to develop not just methodologies, but also tools that implement them. I think this is still a highly emergent area. So some policymakers may think that we're already there or almost there. If you think about AI Act and its implementation and trying to enforce it, there were already attempts to start implementing it from August to September of this year, but very recently it was postponed by a year and a half or so. And I think part of it is the realization that on the methodological side, we're still quite far from being able to test for safety in a rigorous way. And we can also see like a few emergent works that appear about the same time that try to question whether we can trust current AI benchmarks, what would be a way to go from benchmarking to better understanding of FairML and safe AI in general, and how those AI safety benchmark safety now and how they should do it in the future. So I think there are many low-hanging fruits here when we can enrich our research methodology and use different mixed methods. So there are different strategies how we can think about going from machine learning model towards lifecycle aware evaluation, how to think about static versus dynamic benchmarks and continuous evaluation, how to think about developing safeguards to ensure robust evaluation, such it doesn't become checkboxing or just following some blind methodology, but really understanding what exactly we are testing, how we're testing, and how can we trust the results of the test. How can we measure the safety behavior of next capabilities. So again, like making a clear disentanglement when we check for particular capabilities and when we check for reliability and safety in context of those capabilities. How can we accumulate good and bad practices of safe AI evaluation and developing a stress testing playbook? I think it's important again to realize that we do need to focus much more on developing specialized benchmarks when it's very clear what the benchmark is constructed for, what research questions it is able to answer and what not. And I think we already see quite some attempts in that direction. I think it's much less so on stress testing. Obviously, we have lots of ideas how to do different forms of sensitivity analysis, but what goes beyond that, I think, is still underdeveloped. We can see some interesting developments, again, for instance, in fairness awareness literature on ML. Think about counterfactual flips, how to combine evaluation and explanation, how to develop particular strategies for controlled bias injection, missiness data, corruption, robustness, and so on and so forth. But I think there is still a long way to go how to systematically think about this stress testing and how to develop both generic and application-specific approaches for that. So I think this is where I would like to conclude. I hope I gave a little bit of glimpse of where we are in terms of like a huge imbalance, how fast we move forward with developing novel AI approaches and AI-based systems, and then how far backwards or how far behind we are with developing evaluation methodology for these systems. Consequently, our understanding of AI systems and their safety is quite limited, and then partially it is due to this limited set of methods and tools for comprehensive evaluation. And I hope that there will be many more research groups joining this effort on developing much more comprehensive portfolio of tools for debugging, profiling, verifying, certifying, auditing, and stress testing ML models and techniques with and without human in the loop. So this I'd like to stop and take some questions if we have some time left. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a question for you, Mykola. So the question is from Nada. How can we design evaluation protocols that better reflect real-world distribution shifts and adversarial behaviors instead of static benchmark performance? In security-related ML systems, do you think benchmark leakage and unrealistic splits are currently one of the main reasons of overly optimistic performance claims?
Thanks. I think I understood the first part of the question, which was about like what shall we do when we have a difference in distribution between the training data and when we apply a model in practice. I think this is a long-standing methodological issue. So if you think about different research communities I've been active in, machine learning under concept drift, which is at least 30 years active, maybe more. People would come up with different ideas how to inject drift, how to characterize drift, and again, how to, well, essentially simulate the settings that we train the model in on one distribution, and we would apply it on data coming from a different distribution. Again, well, this is very hard to achieve because once you have a control settings, you increase your internal validity, but you lose external validity and ecological validity. The other form, of course, it's very nice when we can collect real data, when we know that distributions are different. And I think now it is possible, like for instance, it's very common to think about collecting data from one hospital and then testing how well model performs on data from the same hospital, but also from other hospitals. So it's already an interesting approach that would allow us to, well, do assessment of generalization of the model to previously unseen distribution. I think since that period, lots of developments happened. So you can think about communities like continual learning and then different setups in context of continual learning. You can think about model distillation. You can think about domain adaptation. So within all of these communities, people try to see how to go either into this, let's say, simulation path or collecting real-world data or collecting real-world data and then injecting synthetically controlled changes. I think all of them are useful. Do we have a well-established methodology? No, I don't think so. I think lots of research in continual learning still suffers from the problem of assessment. There is still a mindset where we primarily focus on benchmarking and leaderboards and beating the state of the art by certain percentage points rather than claiming particular properties of performance of a model or a system. So I think if we focus on showing or demonstrating what the properties of ML models are, particularly in context of out of distribution settings or distribution shift or concept drift, I think this is much more valuable. There is relatively little work on mechanistic interpretability or looking inside learned representations or what is happening in learned representations when we experience distribution shift and other challenges alike. So I think much more work is needed in that direction. So I would say, in my opinion, this is still an open problem, and hopefully within next years we'll see more and more developments on actual evaluation methodologies for these settings.
Thank you so much. Do you have a time for another question? The last one? Yeah.
On my side, yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the question from Shady. Given that performative prediction means our models alter the environment they operate in, how can we design dynamic benchmark that evaluate a model's stability and fairness after deployment rather than just scoring it on a static holdout set?
Right. Well, excellent question. I think it can be answered from a variety of perspectives. I think there is lots of work on supervised learning settings where the problem could be better formulated differently. So, for instance, if I think about fairness awareness research as an example, much of work could be better framed as sequential decision making rather than supervised learning. And I think people realize this with some delay and again come up with some interesting intermediary formulations which are valuable on their own. So I can think of, for instance, strategic classification, which explicitly assumes that once you make predictions, so those predictions would influence the population, and consequently you need to think, well, what's coming next? Here, I think different sub-communities in machine learning AI can learn from each other. I think there is a huge disconnect between supervised learning community, between Gen AI community, and reinforcement learning community. So I think in reinforcement community, people would deal with these problems from day one. I mean, apart from analytical results, I mean, when someone is trying to develop a technique and then show empirically its validity. So we immediately need to think about feedback loops and how to simulate the environment. So it's not sufficient just to make predictions and then see what happens. Next, on offline data, because that evaluation would be very limited. So we don't have what-if scenarios. So I think in the machine learning, in the reinforcement learning community, there is a long tradition to develop not just a benchmark as a data set, but to develop benchmarking suites where you would have learning environments. So learning environments for reinforcement learning agents, for instance. And then those environments would be also controlled. So for instance, you can control the difficulty, how hard it is for an agent to learn a particular task. You would vary how often or what kind of changes happen in the environment. So you can test the adaptivity modes of agents. And then many dimensions alike. So here my point is that I think within the reinforcement learning community, there is a much longer tradition of building evaluation suites, building evaluation environments, which try to resemble some important properties which are relevant for real world, yet to have enough control to simulate what happens in these dynamic settings when we have feedback loops. So this would be a quick answer, but I will be happy to elaborate on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for a fantastic talk. I definitely will highly recommend to my students to listen it, like for a future researcher and computer scientist. And thank you for joining today us. And
many thanks for inviting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think the next speaker will be introduced by Nuria. Nuria, please. Thank you.
Yes. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Novi Quadrianto to you. He is a professor of machine learning at the University of Sussex, and he's also an ELLIS scholar at the Human-Centric Machine Learning Program. Novi has also a strong connection with Ukraine. He has taught at the Lviv Data Science Summer School at UCU, and he has interacted a lot with the Ukrainian community. Novi, I don't know if you could share your screen. Are you there?
Yes, I will try my best. Hopefully it does work.
So in the meanwhile, I can keep talking about you. So I had the pleasure of working with Novi for the past 4 years because we had a joint ELLIS PhD student working on privacy implications of federated learning. And it was really fantastic. It's one of the best attributes of ELLIS, I think, is the ELLIS PhD program and the opportunity to collaborate with so many different researchers. But today, Novi is not going to talk about privacy. He's going to talk about performative prediction made practical. So all yours, Novi, you have around 25 minutes for your presentation, or 20 minutes, and then about 10 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nuria, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. So, Dobry den, everyone. And I'm very happy that the previous speaker, the previous presentation, including from Nuria, that is emphasizing that, it's important, the evaluation is not only one turn, but it's multi-turns. And Mykola was also highlighting about the importance about the deployments is not the end. How about like after post-deployments? There is already a question about performative prediction, and this is what we are going to explore further in terms of the performative prediction. This is a joint work with Javier, Thomas, Carlos, and Jose as part of our Tango projects that is funded by the EU Horizon Europe. So just to mention about motivation. So this is the standard machine learning settings. We already know that we're assuming that we have a fixed training data distribution. That's it, static. Prediction do not affect future observation. If you have data, you have models, there is only one arrow from data to the models. But we already know, which is already highly elaborated in the previous presentation, in many real-world systems, prediction influence decision. Decision change human behavior. Behavior changes future data. So from there, the data and the models, not only one loop, which is from the data to the models, we have another loop that is back, the feedback from the models back to the data. Just to give an examples, concrete examples, in the bank loan decision, if we have a bank that predict the loan default risk using customer financial features, income, saving, credit utilization, payment history, etc., the loans are approved if predicted risk is below a threshold. Is that the end of the story? No. There are actually two performative effects for these particular bank loan decision examples. The first performative effects, prediction change outcomes. So customer predicted as risky, they will receive higher interest rate. Some company actually charging interest rate 48.9%. But the higher interest rate actually can themselves increase the default probability. That's the first performative effect. Prediction changed the outcome. The second performative effect is the customer adapt strategically. The application learn how the model works, and then they will modify behavior, changing, for example, the payment timing. So this is what performative prediction framework is trying to capture. That the model is not only predicting outcome, but is actually influencing the future data that it is trained on. So there is a feedback loop that we shouldn't forget. After deployment, there is something else that's going on because the models that we deployed change the future data distribution. In this particular simple diagrams that I put there, that we started with some models and some data. The models is theta t. The data is just the notation is just calligraphy d theta t. In the first iteration of t plus 1, you train the models, you'll get theta t plus 1, better models. But that particular better models, when you deploy it, create the distribution sieve, where the finished iteration t+1, you're not only having theta t+1, you also have the calligraphy d theta t+1. That's where the data changes because you deploy the models. And this is the core idea of performative prediction, introduced by Juan Perdomo and including Maurice Hartz in 2020. And just for us to be all in the same page, the word performativity stems from the term performative utterance from the philosophy of language. Performative utterance is a sentence that is not just describing a reality, but actually perform an action in our reality. For example, it's like, I apologize for my action. It's one performing the acts of apologizing. And just to put a perspective as well, how is this performative prediction different from the distribution sieve, the standard distribution sieve? The standard distribution sieve environment changes externally. The model does not cause the sieve. You train the models from Europe population. You want to deploy it to the Asian population or to African population. The environment changes externally. You just change where you're going to deploy that particular models. In performative prediction, the model itself induces the sieve. So without doing anything, by simply deploying the models, you create the feedback loop between prediction and data generation. So you might think that performative settings are endogenous systems. And this is the setup of the performative prediction. We have machine learning models, and in here you parameterize with theta. Any machine learning models, linear models or nonlinear models, just capture that with the theta. And the most important thing here is we have so-called distribution map. That's the calligraphy d theta that I put earlier. This is the data distribution that is induced by deployments. The theta actually maps to the new data, x and the y. And in the standard machine learning, you of course have the loss function, which is the L theta computed on the data x and the y. The expected risk now is called performative risk. That's the PR theta, where you take the expectation of the loss, the expectation with respect to the data, x and the y, now not only coming from the fixed P theta or some fixed distribution, but it's actually coming from the distribution map, and the distribution map itself induced by the theta. And in this particular setup, we can actually seek a stable models, the model that have the same risk before and after the deployments. It's robust to the distribution sieve. Sounds like a good models. You deploy it, it's robust to the distribution sieve. This is maybe what we wanted to seek. But we can also seek an optimal model, which is a models that produce the lowest risk after deployment. Those are the two solution concepts that we typically seek. And this is just to restate it, the same two solution concept. The first one, when we look for the stable models, the model that robust to the distribution sieve before and after the deployment, this is so-called the performatively stable point, that you find the minimum on the distribution that is induced by the model itself. So you see that the d theta is with respect to the d theta stables. When you find the minimum that is on the distribution that is being induced by your models, that solution will be a stable solution. As opposed, you can also find an optimal model, which is a performatively optimal point, which is you minimize with respect to that performative risk. That's the performative prediction. So why do we need to make it practical? This seems to be a great framework. Existing research actually focus primarily on theoretical analysis, relying on a strong assumption, convergent guarantee for optimization algorithms. And we might already have a feeling or an intuition that maybe performative prediction is already well established, but why somehow is the technical ideas is remain relatively inaccessible to much broader community. It seems to be a great thing to think about deployment. It's not the end, but what comes after the deployment. So what our goal here is to build intuition through visualization. We all like visualization, hopefully, to explain, for example, the just two solution concept that I just mentioned. What is the meaning of performatively stables? What is the meaning of performatively optimal points? And develop why some algorithm converts and where does it converts and how, why this converts in that way. And also move beyond idealized assumption, how to gain practical insight about convergence in the non-ideal environments where we live in. So this is the visualization that we come out with. We're trying to decouple the space of the performative prediction. So the decoupling performative risk is measuring the performance of the models after model training and after deployment-induced distribution shift. So from this performative risk that I was mentioning before, that you take with respect to just one theta, you can open up that theta to be theta d, which is the after deployment-induced distribution shift, and theta m, which is after model training. So if you see on the right-hand side, the visualization of the risk, the blue color one, this is the risk after you do model training. The risks go down. That's with respect to the theta m. Once you deploy it, the distribution of the data changes. That's where it goes up, brown or the orange color. That's with respect to the theta d. So when you just optimize with respect to the theta m, this particular risk is just DPR, decoupled performative risk, where the theta 0 stays at theta 0 because you still have theta d, and theta, the other theta, which is theta 1, because now the theta m, you have already optimized one step. And then when the distribution or the deployment distribution shift happen, that's with the orange color one, that theta 0, the first theta 0 of the theta d will also be theta 1. When you have completed the one iteration, which is theta m and theta d, you will have the performative risk with respect to that particular one iteration. So this is what the typical visualization that we can see in the performative prediction. And what we are going to do now is, maybe we can visualize and open this up, the theta d and the theta m. You have here the visualization. One side is the theta d, which is after deployment-induced distribution shift, and the other one is after model training theta m. And then now your space is actually a decoupled performative risk. And what we see here is like, after we train an initial models theta 1, this is the blue curve, you move to one direction. That's on the theta m direction. The risk is become DPR theta 0, theta 1, because you only change the theta m. After the deployment, the distribution changed to D1. And the race is become DPR, theta 1, theta 1. And this deployment pulls towards the diagonal cross section. So you will have this particular iteration of theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d, theta m, theta d. And in the diagonals is where the theta m, which is after model training, is the same as theta d after deployment distribution shift. What is the purpose of this particular visualization? The first things what we can use for this particular visualization is to understand about the two solution concept. The first solution concept is performatively stable point. So we can see here in the visualization of theta d and theta m, what we are going to show here, supposedly you have two theta d section, which is, this is what the data changes because of your model deployed, which is, we call it theta d. That's the first theta d, which is theta 2, that particular cross-section, the red color one. If we see across the theta m space, that's where you're going to try to optimize or find the models that is the best for that particular induced distribution by the theta 2. And that particular risk looks like just a simple risk. But you know that the minimum point is actually at 5, not at this particular theta 2, which is minus 2.8. So that particular theta 2, it's not a stable point. As opposed to the theta d, which is at the theta 1, when you try to optimize that particular theta d with respect to that theta d, with respect to the theta m, the minimum can be one of the solutions at the theta 1 itself. And that's what makes the theta 1 to be a stable point, because the minimum in one fixed cross-section is the same models that induce that distribution. The minimum with this distribution that is being induced by the theta 1 is also theta 1. So that's why it is a stable point. So we have the proposition from this particular visualization that if a particular point is a stable point of the performative risk, then the gradient in the direction of the fixed distribution cross-section, so the gradient of the theta m with respect to theta m has to be 0 for the point to be stable. In contrast with the performatively optimal solution, the optimal point of the performative risk has to lie on this diagonal point, where the theta t diagonal line, where the theta d is equal to the theta m. And as you can see here, the visualization, this particular point of the red point is the minimum of that particular diagonal. So that's why it's performatively optimal point. And from that particular visualization, we can actually see as well, or have some proposition that if the risk of the performative risk is strictly convex, then the optimal point is actually when you have the gradient in the diagonal direction has to be 0. And we will see how these two criteria can be used to understand the practical insight from our experiment. So this is the visualization, allow us to somehow try to understand where is the stable point and what is the optimal point, and what is the difference between the stables and the optimal point, hopefully. And then we can also see this in terms of how the algorithm converts. So there are algorithms that look for a stable point. The algorithm that look for the stable points as simple as you have the models, you deploy it, and you get the new data distribution because of these particular changes of the deployed model. So get the data samples of the distribution induced by theta t, train the models, and then deploy the models, get the new data distribution from this particular deployed models. This is the standard retraining. And what we know, or what we can see here, the standard retraining purpose will only give us a stable point. So what you see that the retraining will go from the theta m to theta d, theta m, and theta d, and in the end, finish the iteration. And you can show that it is a stable point because only the gradient with respect to the theta m is equal to 0. The gradient of the theta m plus theta d doesn't equal to 0. So that's why this is actually correspond to the stable point. So repeated gradient descent, repeated risk minimization, only giving us a stable solution. As opposed, if you wanted to get an optimal point, the key step is to compute the gradient of the performative risk itself. So this is the performative risk that we described before. What you want is you get the gradient with respect to that particular performative risk. But of course, it's not easy because the performative gradient descent, the perf GD, is difficult to calculate because you wanted to compute the gradient of the theta where your expectation depends on the distribution map that has the theta component on that. But as we know from the literature of Bayesian machine learning, you can use two tricks, which is either reinforce or the reparameterization tricks. And this is what we visualize here in terms of the steps that this performatively optimal algorithm taking. What we observe here is like the algorithm still does not just move in the diagonal line. It's also move in terms of off diagonals and back to the diagonal lines. But we can see here that this particular optimization step actually incorporate information about the theta d and theta m. And when the algorithm converts, we can check that actually the gradient with respect to the theta d plus theta m is equal to 0, because the gradient at the diagonal lines equal to 0. And that's why this particular algorithms converts to the optimal point. And in terms of the distribution map, just to describe or to give an overview, what kind of mechanisms that you can have in terms of simulating this distribution shift because you deployed your models. In the literature, actually, most of the examples is so-called Bayes distribution family. It's encompass almost all of the distribution map that are considered, including the one that strategic classification was being mentioned. So in here, what you have in the Bayes distribution map is you take your data from some Bayes distribution, from Gaussian distribution, or whatever distribution that you might want to think about. And then there is a transformation, which is phi, that take that particular samples from the Bayes distribution and transform them with respect to the theta information. In the strategic classification, the transformation is just maximizing the utility while minimizing the cost, minimizing the difference between your original data points and the new data points that is changed because of the deployment of your models. And in here, what we can do with that particular visualization or insight is to understand. We always talk about strictly convex, strongly convex assumption. How about if we don't have that particular criteria? Here we will just first have one particular problem, which is just problem with the high dimensional. This is still a convex problems. We can show where is the optimal point, where is the stable points. This is the visualization on the top here, where you have what you have is the red dash, which is the theta optimal solution, and you have the purple dash, which is the stable solution. And you can see some of the algorithms are converging to that stable, some of the algorithms are converging to that optimal. And you can see it from the gradient based on the visualization that we're presenting, that in repeated gradient descent, which is the algorithm that converts to the stable point, only the gradient with respect to the theta m, this is the dash in here, that goes to 0. Not the theta gradient with respect to the theta m and theta d that goes to 0. It's not the gradient with respect to the diagonal lines. So that's why this RGD converts to the stable points. And in the perf GD, we can see that the perf GD, which is the orange and the green, it goes into the optimal solution. And when we visualize the gradients, we can see here, none of them actually goes to 0. Not the theta m gradient, not the theta d gradients, but they are actually in the opposite direction of the theta m and theta d. That's why when you add them up, the two gradients, they goes to 0. And that means the gradient 0 at the diagonal line. That's what you can see here, the effect. None of the gradient goes to 0, but the sum of them goes to 0. So those algorithms converts to the performatively optimal solution. And this is another experiment that we show that how about we go beyond the classical setting of strategic classification? In a strategic classification, typically you assume your model is linear with respect to the parameter theta. How about if you have non-linear models with the neural networks? How does the algorithms that we have, perf-GD, RGD, or we can also introduce some things that people haven't considered before, using momentum Adagrad as an optimizer. What does the effect of that in terms of convergence of the algorithm? Because the theory doesn't show anything in here because it doesn't fit of the strictly convex condition. Where does it go? Is it go to stable? Is it go to the optimal? And that's what we are trying to reveal with this particular technique or trick. In RGD, actually, only the gradient with respect to theta m goes to the 0. As again, what we shown here, the RGD or retraining, simply retraining, only give you to the stable points. But in the perf-GD, as opposed to the previous experiment, both gradient of the theta m and theta d actually approach 0. that still fit the condition of the gradient at the diagonal line equal to 0, because you get 0 plus 0 is also still equal to 0. And then as expected, the other grad and momentum speed up the convergence dynamics in this experiment. And since we show this decoupled space, maybe some of us might wonder, like, why don't we just solve this decoupled optimum? Instead of finding just one theta, we can find the optimum of the models after model training and the optimum of the models after the deployment shift. And there is an incentive actually finding this decoupled optimum because of the non-stability of the performative optimum. We can show that this particular solution is strictly better than optimizing just performative risk. There is a clear incentive for the institution actually to pursue the decoupled point. This is to highlight that the institution have all the powers and we are just at the mercy of the institution. And in the decoupled space, it means that the institution say to the population, I'm deploying this kind of models. You can play around with that particular models. That's the theta D. But what I'm really using in my bank loan decision is the theta M that is slightly different than theta D. It was actually can be shown that this is beneficial to the institution. So this work actually exposed a critical vulnerability. The institution can strategically shape behavior through misaligned or deceptive disclosure with potentially severe consequences for affected individual. What we have shown there, that people strategically change their features, their behavior, but they didn't get what they expect to get because there is a decoupled between the models that being deployed and the models that is being disclosed. And just to sum up and to summarize that, and we hope that some of you might think that performative prediction is one alternative or one aspect that could be interesting for evaluation of algorithms. And we try to provide this a performative gym where it's in terms of the capability is giving some examples of the algorithm, but the point here is like the hope that we can extend together some of the mechanism of some of the distribution maps. So we have some implementation of the distribution map, a standard one, strategy classification, linear, non-linear. But if there is some, potential things to develop this together, that we can have a better distribution map, a variety of distribution map as a way to try to understand what is the robustness of the algorithm going beyond simply a static benchmarking. So if we can work together on that, that would be amazing things that we can pursue. And with that, I finish the presentation, and this is some of the reference. And we do have a blog post actually for this performative prediction made practical, where a little bit more interactive in terms of the visualization of the stable and optimal point, if you find that useful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Novi. Thank you for this interesting presentation on performative prediction. I don't know if there is any questions. I don't see any questions on the question and answer. But Joseph has a question, or is this from the slide? Okay, Joseph, go ahead.
If I can, start maybe with a question. So thank you for a fantastic talk. It's very interesting. I would like to ask, actually two questions. We'll see. So first one is, do your algorithms, do they naturally generalize? You mentioned the momentum and other graph. Do they sort of generalize to stochastic versions easily, that you can, and can they, does it make sense to scale up, and would it scale up to stochastic and distributed potentially? What's kind of the workhorse of the current models?
So you mean that the usefulness of the momentum and other graph?
No, what I more mean, if the algorithms which you, or all the stuff which you propose theoretically, say if it, does it hold? I don't know if I got all the details, but I think in the stochastic version, you just don't assume to get access to the whole gradient. You have access only to a sample of a gradient on a batch, on a sample of the data. Does it all work still, or?
Yeah. So I guess in here, the setting of it, I must clarify perhaps. So in here, the point here is this is the standard gradient descent or the standard repeated risk minimization. So you are assuming that you are actually solving it as the problems that you have already the data, but because you deploy the models, there are some changes to this particular data distribution. In that particular setting where there is no stochastic, means that you don't take the streaming or the sequential things, that momentum undergrad works.
Mm-hmm.
But in the setting, there is already like, an extension of the performative prediction, exactly what you were saying, that how about like it is really a stochastic in the sense like, that you don't things about, you have the whole batch of the data set, but you have the stream of it. Mm-hmm. This we didn't analyze, and we haven't, I would not be able to say anything much
Mm-hmm.
on this.
Okay.
This is the setting on the batch gradient descent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. And my second question is, are there data sets for it? Like you mentioned the gym, does it also include the data where people just go on and try their things?
So this is a very important point, Joseph. That this is the point about this performative prediction, that is a really nice technical frameworks, but in terms of the evaluation, it's very difficult because you need to have the base data set. There is a standard-based data set, credit loan kind of things. And then the thing here is like the most important is you define the distribution map that you think it will be changing that particular data. And the difficulty here is, of course, like, you have you need to know actually, like, you need to deploy it. And then you need to estimate what is this distribution map, or you make some assumption in that. The point about the performative gym is hopefully like, you have the data set that you train with the static setting. You define a range of the distribution map where you can see actually maybe in certain distribution map, in certain realistic settings, the algorithm is actually not stable, or it doesn't give you a robust solution with respect to the distribution shift of the distribution map. I might also wanted to say some things about the data collection itself. The performative prediction as it is now, it's very difficult to find like the data set or the real data. But in terms of the examples that I was mentioning in the very beginning, the first performative effect of the bank loan, that the prediction changed the outcome. This is so-called outcome performativity. And this might be easier to collect the data, perhaps because like you have the data, which is the person, the X, and then you have the prediction, the interest rate, and then you will see in the end the result, whether this person actually will default or not default. So the distribution map that you need, it doesn't have the theta itself, but it just have the prediction. So X cross with the prediction of your interest rate, giving rise to the outcome, whether you default or not default. And the main thing is all about experiment in this setting, and this is the call for all of us, if it is an interesting framework. So let's develop together, let advance together the practical side of the performative prediction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.